Hello and welcome to our webinar. We're going to be looking at customer service challenges within the social housing sector, and more specifically, how social housing providers can provide outstanding customer service in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic and other challenges. I'm Liz Wilson, I'm the Head of Marketing here at Ascendex, and I'm joined by Jack Forster, who's our National Solutions Strategist. So what are we going to look at today? Firstly, we're going to address the customer service issues caused by the pandemic and have a look at what's wrong with some of the customer service channels currently in use today. We're going to propose the type of strategy that social housing providers could consider instead, and have a look at how consumer and tenant behaviour is shifting towards mobile. We'll have a brief look at some of the tech available, and then look at the specific use cases where mobile-focused customer services can be used. We're also going to make sure that we drill down into the real world outcome of using a mobile focused approach in this particular industry.
Thank you, Liz. I'm now going to take a little bit of time just to look at the individual challenges that we've identified through a collaborative bit of research with our housing association clients. So challenge number one is really just addressing the service issues that have been caused by the pandemic. And the first undeniable impact has been the fact that there's been a really reduced amount of face-to-face in-person interaction availability, which is an obvious impact. This has had a real impact on the strain for customer service teams within housing associations. As people have been pushed to more remote channels, this means that getting hold of an agent has become an increasing more challenging endeavour for tenants. Challenge number two has been around the channels that are in play are a little bit dated. When we've spoken to housing associations, they've expressed to us that they're not necessarily ahead of the curve when it comes to communications, channels that they're using. So the channels that are the most popular within housing associations in our research have been phone calls, firstly. Now, the concern with the phone call is that 86% of calls from organisations tend to be ignored, especially when it's chasing something like a rental arrear or something like that. You also rely on a resident being in the right place at the right time, having the relevant details to hand, whether it's a letter with a reference number or other information that's needed. And there really needs to be a perfect storm in order for that call to bear fruit. It's also really expensive. And when you look at the cost, once you've managed to get through to one of your residents or tenants, the cost for to take a payment over the phone roughly is around £1.25, whereas if it was an automated solution, that would drop massively to 47.5p. And off the back of the first statistic I shared with you around calls being easily ignored, the conversion rate is impacted by this as well, with calls having a conversion rate of around 8%. Whereas when you look at something more mobile focused like SMS, that jumps to 32%. The second most popular communication channel of choice for housing associations historically has been via letter. Open rates for letters, although still quite high at 75%, are dwarfed when you look at SMS, opening at around 95%. Both of which are actually better than emails, which have got an average open rate of 20%, but actually that dropped to 11% during the pandemic, as lots of businesses scrambled around and didn't apply much strategy to their thinking. Just went, well, we can't, we need to communicate, and they're not coming into the shops anymore. Let's just bombard them with emails. So more and more people are just, kind of having, spam filters have been improved, or they're just simply deleting without reading. So you've got a higher chance of your meaningful communication being missed entirely. There's a response time drop when it comes to letters, with it taking, a tenant roughly around 17 days to lift that letter out of their fruit bowl and interact with it. Whereas if it's an SMS, on average, it takes about 90 seconds for someone to engage with that. The conversion rates are a lot lower as well, with once that response has happened, 5.1% of people actually end up converting off the back of receiving a letter, where it's 32% for an SMS. You've also got the fact that it's less engaging. There's a huge amount of spam coming through our letterbox. We are all impacted by that individually. And once again, the chances of that letter being scooped up and put straight in the recycling bin are a lot greater when it comes to a letter dropping through the letterbox, rather than an SMS where only 1% is currently spam, with it being quite a protected medium. It's also really expensive. If you look at the cost to send out 1,000 pieces of communication, if you were to do that through the post, it would cost roughly around £500. Whereas if you were to switch that to SMS, it would drop incredibly to £38. That's over 13 times more expensive to communicate via a traditional route rather than more modern technology. And it's very rare that actually improving your technology and your communication strategy or kind of evolving a process can actually save you money rather than cost you money. So it's really important to look at these things. It's also untraceable. Once you've sent that letter out, you have no idea what's happened to it. Whereas with an SMS, you can actually monitor whether it's been opened, delivered, read, etc. So how can social housing providers address these challenges and improve their strategies? And the main focus here has to be around mobile customer service strategies. The main key here is to promote self-service. It allows tenants and residents to self-cure, if you like, and they're able to do this 24/7 and on their own terms. And recent survey shows that 75% of people actually prefer self-service. I fall comfortably in this category. I would go out of my way to be able to engage with an organisation without actually having to pick up the phone and make a call. And I know that a lot of my peers and colleagues are the same. There's also a reducing cost to provide these services. By replacing paper with SMS, not only are you doing your bit to save the planet, you're also saving the pounds and shillings, and I'm sure the finance officers within the organisation will be happy to hear that. You've also got the fact that automated service reduce the need for agent-based interactions within your business, which frees up FTE to be more productive elsewhere within the housing association. And as mentioned earlier, it's completely traceable. You can provide an audit trail and analytical data when it comes to mobile-focused strategies, including read receipts, etc. So you can really get a true return on investment and work out what's working and what could be improved. So what has driven the shift towards mobile-focused strategies? It's been happening organically year on year, but that has been sped up exponentially by the pandemic. A lot of housing associations I've spoken to have had a digital revolution on their roadmap, but this has been brought forward massively by the pandemic and has almost forced the hand. And it's not surprising, really. The average smartphone usage has increased during the pandemic to 3 hours and 15 minutes per day. And this statistic absolutely blows my mind because you think that can't be right. But when you stop and think, it really is. The average person checks their phone over 58 times per day. Now, I've got two phones. I've got a work phone and a personal phone, so I will probably be on the upper end of that scale. But you can start to see, if you start monitoring how much you pick up your phone, how susceptible you would be to communications through that channel. It also, if you actually are ahead of the curve and look at embedding this sort of technology within your organisation, it allows your residents to engage with you on their platform of choice, whether that's WhatsApp, SMS, or picking up the phone to make a call. It's making you as easy to transact with as possible. And 66% of your residents are already interacting this way with other, less pivotal organisations within their life. So why can't housing associations take advantage of this and be as simple to transact and engage with? I'm now going to hand over to Liz, who will go into what sorts of customer service challenges can be solved via mobile communications.
Thanks, Jack. So one of the main touch points between social housing providers and tenants is collecting rent. And as it is quite a sensitive area, there's a lot of ways in which this can be managed poorly, leading to a degraded relationship between the two parties. Mobile collections is Ascendex's method of addressing this challenge, and it's both a process and a technology platform. So in the first instance, it leverages the high and open and click-through rate that Jack's already alluded to of SMS or indeed WhatsApp to engage tenants in the process, to get them engaged, to start them listening to the messages. And then it takes tenants through a journey which critically gives them control over their finances. Although, of course, the parameters are set by the social housing provider, within that framework, tenants can choose to make a payment. They can choose to set up a payment plan, request a payment holiday, or review previous correspondence, etc. And it's important that it's a very friction-free process for tenants. So in this particular example, there's a reference number as a means of somebody logging into the platform. But if you want to, you can instead ask for multiple pieces of personally identifiable data so that nobody has to try and remember a reference number. And for me, actually, as somebody whose paperwork is buried in a loft and never ever wants to go up there because it's full of spiders and it's not great, that's very helpful. I would far rather have a means of accessing an environment where I can get to this content without having to go and unearth some oblique reference number. And similarly, when it comes to actually taking the payment, instead of hurtling somebody out of this beautiful, fully branded environment, which they recognize and are confident with, it keeps all the transactions in the app, in this particular environment. So it's completely friction-free. Of course, we know the pandemic has put many more people in financial hardship through no fault of their own. So being able to offer flexible payment and the ability to self-cure, as Jack already alluded to, is actually really important for tenants' well-being. But does it work? So one of our social housing partners saw the following results from using the mobile collections environment. In this instance, they sent around 51,000 messages, about 90% of which were delivered. For the record, non-deliveries tend to be either that the mobile number is out of use, that it's been entered incorrectly, so it doesn't exist, or it's a landline. Residents who received the SMS and then opened the mobile journeys environment was 32%. So, you know, we touched on earlier that the click-through rate of an SMS is 32% on average. It was exactly that for this particular campaign. Of residents who opened the environment and went on to make a payment, that was 45%. So in total, this campaign collected over £800,000. And to put that into context, 13% of all residents who received that text message went on to make a payment. I just want to be clear, in this particular instance, these were residents who had not responded to earlier requests for payment, but they did respond to this. Another means in which you speak to your residents, of course, is around engineering booking, so making repairs and all of that sort of good stuff. And today, it's very possible that residents need to make a call to you and potentially have to spend a long time on hold. Now, there's two ways of resolving this. The one on the screen is the word isn't more complex. It's a little bit more. There's a little bit more setup involved for the provider. But the second means is just to literally switch out telephone calls for SMS, but we'll touch on that in just a second. What you can see on screen here is a really slick mobile focused environment whereby a tenant can simply book in, identify themselves first, then they can book in the repair at the time and place that works for them, and then they get that confirmation through that app. And this works very similarly to mobile collections in the respect that you can send out a text to prompt them engaging in this particular journey, and that could go through text or WhatsApp if you prefer. And then they'll link off to this environment and they can do all of the selection of dates and times themselves. And the important thing here is that this works in tandem with your current systems. And if you're thinking, my lord, not my system, it's incredibly out of date, don't worry. We've worked with the most modern tech and also the most antiquated tech in the world. That's probably an exaggeration, but it's quite antiquated, to implement processes like this that sit on top of your legacy software and enable you to have a really slick engagement process with your tenants. And an automated process like this, as we were talking about earlier, is going to represent a big resource saving to admin teams that are already stretched. So, you know, something like this, which allows people to self-serve, just takes that strain out of teams. And it's worth noting that across all industries, 81% of customers will attempt to take care of matters themselves before contacting a live representative. So you're not trying to get them to swim upstream here. You know, this is something they want to do. So I touched on very briefly in the previous slide that a really quick way of both improving your residents' experience and reducing the strain on your call center team is to simply switch from telephone calls to an SMS chat solution. And I want to talk you through this now. So if, for example, you provide your residents with a mobile number that they can all text into, and it could be text or WhatsApp, for example, you're going to get all of these messages into an online platform, which then an agent or agents can respond to those messages. And the nice thing is that you can respond to multiple text message conversations at the same time. But if your agent is on a telephone call, that's the only telephone call they can make at that time. So they're not going to be able to pick up another call, which means somebody's going to be waiting on hold. And this is great for the resident too, because there can be huge gaps between text messages. So a resident can initiate the conversation, get a response, forget about it, come back to it 4 hours later, but then they'll still get that continuous response environment. And the agent, because they have all this stored in their online platform, can pick up and drop conversations as seamlessly as the residents do. And again, this doesn't have to be through text. This can be through WhatsApp as well, if the residents prefer, or indeed you prefer. So alerts, another key means of speaking to residents is about informing them about building works, or potentially some power outage, planned power outage, or perhaps an unplanned power outage, or some waterworks, or anything like that. Any reason you need to get in touch with your residents, you need something that cuts through the noise. So again, you don't alarm people, and indeed they don't call or inundate you on social media with questions about what's going on. So the only challenge with SMS, and as you've probably gathered, Jack and I are firmly on the SMS fan bus, is that it of course has a limitation in the number of characters, the physical number of words you can send through to somebody. And this is where a richer messaging channel can help. So the example on the slide here is an SMS landing page. And basically you send the text includes a link, and then the link takes them off to this particular landing page. And what you can see here is that it's fully branded again, so it's going to build trust in the message, and it gives them a lot more information about what's going on, indeed as much information as you want to put in there. And it also has the interactive buttons. So in this particular instance, you can click through to find out more details. You can go to a chat, into a text chat-based conversation with your agents, or you can add that work to your phones, to the resident's phone calendar, so they can have a reminder on their phone that that's going to be taking place. And I think it's worth calling out that while we advocate proactively communicating with residents in this way, we're not actually shutting off or proposing that you shut off means for them to speak to you directly. We're just proposing that if you proactively communicate with them with a message chat through a message channel that cuts through the noise, firstly, you'll get fewer messages, but you should always, if you can, offer the option for them to get in touch with you, just as we can see on screen here. So chatbots, chatbots is a really interesting one. 47% of organisations are expected to implement chatbots for customer support. And the top 2 use cases for chatbots are getting a quick answer in an emergency and resolving a complaint or question. So perfect for the customer services environment within a social housing environment. But I think in my experience, and I'd count myself among this number 2, they sound really complex. Like, how do you get started with something like chatbots? And they can be really complex. You can have a very sophisticated chatbot which has machine learning and natural language processing, and we do support that technology 100%. Or if you have simpler requirements, you can simply upload your pre-existing FAQs and simply give residents clear prompts as to how to access this information. So this is how we've implemented it ourselves. For example, on one of the particular channels we use, it was really straightforward. You give the residents a series of words that they should place into a text-based chat, and it shows them the appropriate response based on what they texted you. So it can be super simple. And when it comes to replacing things like FAQs, they're incredibly powerful as well in terms of reducing the strain on your team for answering repetitive, simple questions. I think it's worth noting too that chatbots, you don't need a special app, you don't need a special environment for it. Chatbots can be activated through SMS, good old fashioned SMS, and also through WhatsApp too, which is, so many people have WhatsApp now that it's worth considering that as a channel as well.
Thanks for that. There's some really innovative examples of how our technology can and is helping housing associations, and that brings me on to the next slide. Really, you can see that this is not just an idea that we've had. This is stuff that we are currently doing within your sector. And there's a fantastic quote here from the Income and Customer Service Manager from Cadwin Housing Association, and you can see here we've actually managed to achieve the holy trinity for this housing association, allowing them to manage their internal resources better. Be easier for their tenants to transact with or make payments for, which is a big benefit, but also reduce their internal costs. And it's very rare that a housing association will be able to, or any organisation for that matter, improve and evolve their technology and internal resources, but actually save costs in the process of doing so. Which I'm sure if there's any sort of chief financial officers on the call or anyone in the finance departments, that'll be music to their ears. Now, I've actually been lucky enough to work with and speak with a number of housing associations over the last 6 months while working on this project. And there are some housing associations that are really trailblazing with fantastic communication strategies, whether that's working with us or it's already in hand and they've just bounced some ideas off us. That's fantastic. But this is a typically traditional industry that we're discussing here. And there are some organizations that are a little behind the curve and are a little intimidated about and kind of embarking on this endeavor to evolve their communication strategies. So what I want to go through now is just how can you get started on doing that. So we actually work with existing systems, as Liz mentioned earlier, and we do so with relative ease. Whether you've got brand new CRM systems and customer management systems in place, or whether you're still using ones from 20 years ago or 30 years ago, we've got this track record of working with housing associations to achieve this. And we've got real experience in this sector with over 100 local authorities and housing associations on our books that we work with on a one-to-one basis. That brings on to the next point. We take time to get to know your organization. We make sure that we've got the language perfect within the communication. It's not an out-the-box solution. It will be built collaboratively with your key stakeholders to ensure that the solution is truly bespoke. And that brings on to the final point, really. If we do work with our housing association clients, we become strategic partners, not simply a provider of a service. We will work with you and keep regular contact with you, ensuring that as communication evolves, as it has a tendency to do, we will keep you abreast of the latest tech available to you, what you could do to take advantage of that and capitalize on that and improve on that, rather than you having to either keep your ear close to the ground yourself or allow any sort of evolution that you take to become obsolete again in 5-10 years and then have to go through a full overhaul. We will work with you to ensure that you're always ahead of the curve, if you like. So that brings us to the end of this webinar. Thank you so much for attending. We hope you found it fruitful. If you want any more information, you can reach out via our customer service teams there on the landline number there, or via email, or please feel free to reach out to me personally on LinkedIn. I know a lot of people after these webinars have done so I'm more than happy to engage in a more informal level via LinkedIn. Thank you for attending again, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye-bye now.